Click, click. The light flickered on and off. What do you think that's about? I heard Ethan ask. I don't know, but they don't seem to either, Bear replied, gesturing to the room. I smiled slightly as a mild warmth filled me. It was small, but the little interaction with the people I loved filled me with so much joy. I steadied my thoughts and then began again, once I remembered the correct letters. After Ben's radio was broken, we had felt awful that he couldn't salvage it. However, to make up for it, we told him that it was super cool, he knew Morse code, and that he could teach us if he'd like. We thought that it might make him feel better about once again having something to do. It only lasted a few weeks, but it seemed to do the trick. We never had use for it again. But now, H-E-L-L-O. I flickered the lights rhythmically on and off, hoping they would pick up. Why is it flashing like that? Is it burning out? Ethan asked. Things in this house don't break, remember? They're usually already broken when we find them, Daniel pointed out. H-E-L-L-O. Wait, Bear said. That's Morse code. H-E-L-L-O. It's saying hello, she noted. Yeah, you're right. Y-E-S. An expression of surprise showed on Bear's face. Did you just hear us? Y-E-S. Bear and Ethan exchanged glances before turning back to the light. The birds and puppets still looked as confused as ever. J-O-E-L. Joel, Ethan exclaimed. Joel, are you okay? How are you? Where are you? S-A-F-E. The two breathed a sigh of relief. R-U-O-K. Bear smiled at the abbreviation. Yeah, we're fine. You can see and hear us. Y-E-S. How? Never mind. That's not important. Is that really Joe? Where is he? Daniel asked. He had never learned code with us. We don't know. He just said, safe. Joe, listen, you need to get out of here. We'll find a way out on our own. Don't risk your life for us. N-O. He said no. Ethan sighed. Joel, we're fine. You need to leave before they find you. W-O-N-T. What? Won't leave? Or they won't find you? B-O-T-H. Stop being stubborn, Bear demanded, in a sharp whisper. A bird by the door suddenly clapped its hands, and the puppets all hushed, then began filing over to the door. As they did, my friends looked up at the light one last time. S-A-V-E. They offered a concerned look before exiting the room and following the swarm of puppets. I leaned back in my chair and began biting my nails as I watched them all sit down for story time in the library. Larry sat far away from them this time, but he never once took his eyes off them. He stared with the same unhinged look that he had back in the house towards the end of his time there. His intentions were clear. They had been apparent from the moment he began talking to Daniel. He wanted revenge on us. He wanted us dead. Larry had been unstable since the day we had arrived at the house. But as time wore on, it only got worse. The radio incident was what officially broke him. I often look back and wonder that if maybe we had tried more with him, maybe If we had made more effort to show him we really did care, things would have turned out different. Sure, Larry was unsufferable to deal with, but he was just another one of us at the end of the day, scared and trapped. But after what he did his last night in the house, it became clear that we couldn't possibly keep him around. The signs had been there. I remember sitting with Andy as we shared a book with one another in the sunroom. Her head rested on my shoulder as we both traced through the words, waiting for each other to finish before turning the page. As we sat there, Bear and Ethan entered with a deck of cards. "Hello, lovebirds. How goes it?" Ethan joked as he plopped down on the floor. Bear offered us a smile but avoided eye contact. "And if it isn't the soon-to-be lovebirds," Andy jabbed back. Ethan and Bear nervously laughed. "Who, me and Bear? Come on, I'm way out of her league." "You've got that confused, buddy." Just then a loud metallic banging came from the bedroom. We all exchanged glances before I bookmarked mine and Andy's page, then stood. I peered around the corner through the living room and into the bedroom, where I saw Larry violently striking the back metal door with a rusted fire extinguisher. I shot a look to Mark, who had been staring out of the parlor window, and he just glanced back at me with the same expression. Together we joined up and made our way to the room while our friends watched from behind. "Larry! Larry!" Mark called above the banging. Larry took a few more strikes at the door before turning to look at us. He had an expression of complete calm on his face. What are you up to?" "Just trying to get the door open," Larry replied plainly before taking a few more swings at it. The extinguisher was beginning to dent. "It doesn't open, buddy. Remember, nothing around here breaks either. We know that." "How do we know for sure, though?" "Well, I think the thing downstairs has proven that for us." Mark laughed nervously. The tension in the air was palpable. "Why don't you put that thing down? They can explode, you know. Don't want anyone getting hurt." "Then you better get back." More strikes against the door. Below us we could hear that thing thudding around. It always got restless when we made too much noise. "Would you cut that out?" Grace called from down the hallway. "You're giving us all headaches, plus the creature's getting agitated." Larry ignored the request and kept swinging. "All right, Larry, that's enough," Mark said, stepping forward and grabbing his shoulder. The man spun around and raised the metal cylinder over his head, ready to strike at a new target. Mark instantly jumped back. "Whoa, Larry, what the hell?" "Back off, Mark. All of you. I'm sick of you all pretending that everything is fine, like this place is normal. It's not normal. It's not fine. We're all going to die anyway. Might as well find out what's behind this door before we go. Who knows? Maybe it's a damn way out." With each word, Larry clubbed the handle with the butt of the extinguisher. On the last hit, the bottom hissed loudly and blasted outward, spewing metal and cream-colored chemicals all over the nearby beds, mine included. Everyone screamed and jumped in surprise at the sound, and the creature below began thundering up the stairs in the adjacent room. We heard it screaming and pounding its xylophone against the wall. At that, everyone moved into the bedroom and shut the door, locking it behind them. Larry lifted the now empty extinguisher and looked at it defeatedly. "Well, damn." Mark lunged forward, yanked it from his hand. "What the hell is your problem? I get that you're upset about everything, but we all are. That doesn't give you the right to scare the shit out of everyone and act like a complete prick. Give it back. I'm not done with the store yet." Larry grabbed on to one end of the exploded canister and the two began to wrestle it back and forth. I stepped forward to help Mark, and that was when Daniel stepped in as well, putting himself between the two men once we won our game of tug-of-war. "Oh, fantastic. Here comes Mr. Hero right on cue." "Simmer down, Larry." "No. You know what? I'm getting really sick of you, Dan. You act like a leader, but what have you achieved for us so far? Huh? A cozy little home in the middle of hell? Yeah, real nice, pal. I'm personally a huge fan of the demon next door. Real nice guy.
Larry, I'm not here to fight.
Of course you are. That's always your answer, especially with me. Bet I'll end up with a black eye at the end of all of this. Would you stop? Jan chimed in. You're scaring us, Larry. Just calm down. I don't act like you care. None of you care about me. Don't you think I've heard the things you say about me behind my back? Larry makes this place unlivable. Larry is the worst. I wish it would have been him at the beginning. It's a small house, remember?
I felt guilt in my chest. The things he claimed we said were exaggerated, but sadly they weren't far off.
Yes, Larry, fine. You get on our nerves sometimes, but that don't mean we don't care about you. We've all talked about each other like that sometimes. That's what living with 12 people in 6 rooms does. You get frustrated sometimes.
Claire yelled.
Screw that. You've all always hated me, and that's a fact. Well, maybe if you didn't treat everyone like rubbish, we would like you a whole lot more.
Benjamin snapped. Everyone, stop it, Daniel said. We've gone this long without taking each other's heads off. Let's not start now.
That's funny coming from you, Dan. The only one who's physically harmed anyone in this room.
Larry jeered. Listen, I'm sorry for that. But you are acting like a complete lunatic right now, Larry.
I am. Look at yourselves. You're all acting like this is our home. Jan sets the dinner room for crackers every meal like a suburban house mum. Ben builds a damn radio like a grandpa working on his model airplanes. Joel and his little posse just sit around playing games all day like a bunch of children. You're all the crazy ones. I'm the only one with enough sense to want to leave, who isn't content just to sit around and wait to die.
Before we could stop him, Larry ploughed past us and threw open the bedroom door. He began moving down the hallway, and we instantly knew where he was heading. Bear and Ethan ran after him as Larry bolted to the kitchen. He grabbed the pantry and had just began to slide it aside when the two caught up to him. They grabbed his arms and yanked him back, but he pulled one hand free and took a swing, striking Ethan across the cheek. Come on, we're in here, you stupid thing, Larry yelled to the door as Bear struggled to restrain him. The creature behind the barrier squealed with delight, and its awful voice sending shivers down my spine. At this point, Frank, Grace, and I were on him as well. Ethan recovered from the blow that had been dealt, and with all of us combined, he didn't stand a chance. We pinned him to the floor, and Larry began hysterically laughing into the carpet. As he did, we all just stared at him in utter shock. Nobody had any words. Larry had utterly lost it, and I couldn't help but feel it was our fault. Daniel and Jan looked at each other before Dan finally spoke. We should tie him up for now. He can't be trusted. Nobody had any arguments. As we grabbed the rope we had stockpiled and began to bind Larry's arms and legs, he stared at Daniel with a completely unhinged smile, the same one I would see him wearing a year and a half later in the playhouse. I'll kill you, Daniel, he told him. When I get the chance, I will. Daniel said nothing. I looked at Bear and Ethan. Ethan avoided eye contact as he tied Larry's legs, and Bear just stared at me with pure hopelessness and shook her head. I placed a hand on her shoulder, then turned to Andy. She had tears in her piercing grey eyes. I stepped over to her and took her in my arms, brushing her hair gently with my fingers. She just shakingly held me and softly sobbed. I knew it wasn't because of Larry. Sure, the scene was upsetting, but Andy was tough and undisturbed by such things. She was crying because she was still trapped. We all were. Larry had just shown what was bound to happen if we remained trapped for too long. It was on my 6th day of surveilling my friends that I noticed it. I watched them eating their usual breakfast of bland Cheerios when something moved in the top corner of the monitor. I panned the camera up and my heart shot into my throat. In the metal raptor of the kitchen, climbing between the spotlights, was the curator. It stared eagerly down at my friends, and my hands began to tremble. I stood and turned towards the door that led outside of the studio, ready to call for it and distract it, but then froze when I saw Larry look up and smile. That's when I noticed it wasn't moving or trying to attack. It was simply watching them. The strange part was that it made no sound, something it didn't often do when it was in the presence of prey. Larry waited until Bear made eye contact with him, and then he grinned and pointed up at the ceiling. Bear hesitated, not wanting to trust the man, but must have thought it harmless to check. An unfortunate mistake. Bear had always found the creature horrifying, more than anyone else at the house. She fell backward out of her chair and screamed, scurrying back up on all fours upon realizing its presence. The scene caused the rest of the puppets to burst into a mob of chaos, which in turn caused the birds to add a strike against Bear. Luckily, this was only her first one in all of her time so far. Ethan had gained one a few days prior thanks to a ploy by Larry, and Daniel had still been hanging on by a thread. As Bear kept looking up, this caused one of the birds to glance up as well and alert the others to the creature's presence. They did not seem happy. As soon as this happened, the curator shrieked and scurried off, pounding its xylophone the whole way into the darkness. The whole sight, while unfortunate for Bear and stressful for all involved, taught me 3 things. One was the curator must have often come this way. Larry seemed accustomed to seeing it up in the rafters and knew it wouldn't hurt him or anything else in the room. That was 2. The third was that the curator ran off when the birds spotted it. It clearly didn't want any conflict with them. I thought back to the ballerinas and how they had attacked the creature without hesitation when we had been trapped on that floor. It was now clear that the monsters of the house were not friendly towards one another. A fraction of an idea began to form in my head, a way for me to safely infiltrate the playhouse and to get my friends out. Although safely was a very loose way of putting it. The idea was insane and only slightly less dangerous than charging in and sneaking around. But my friends were very quickly racking up strikes thanks to Larry, and it was only a matter of time before he devised his own plan to get one of them killed. That meant I had to work fast and try at any cost. All I needed was for my friends to hold out a few more days. This was because for the plan to work, I had to wait for one thing. It needed to be cake night. When I said that the routine was the same every day at the playhouse, that wasn't necessarily true. There was one night of the week that differed from the rest without fail. Cake night. One night on the same day of every week, as far as I could tell from my watch, the birds would gather everyone into the kitchen for dinner. However, instead of just sandwiches, one of the birds would always head down the hallway into the nursery and come back wheeling a layered cart with tins of smashed and ground meat. I considered checking on the nursery cameras to see if I could discern what the fleshy mounds came from, but it was one of those things that I figured I didn't want to know about. Besides, the dark room was impossible to see into anyways, and none of the lights and the control board seemed to help. As long as it didn't involve my friends or an escape, the details were irrelevant. That changed as my brain formulated a plan while sitting in the dusty computer chair. The piles of meat weren't brought in to be eaten raw. They would wheel it into the room, much to the delight of the puppets, and place the tins in the oven to cook while everyone ate. I could smell the permeating scent of burning meat all the way from my safe room. They came out of the oven in underbaked loaves, still bloody and fleshy when they were finished. The birds would then layer the massive slabs together and frost the outside. The first time I watched them do this, I was confused, but what they were doing became clear as they stepped away. They were making some sort of vile cake of flesh. They would set it on the table as all of the puppets horrifically cheered and screeched noises of excitement. They would then cut slices for everyone at the table, But as my friends watched Larry handle the situation, they saw that it was okay to pass their portion off to one of the puppets. The birds seemed to applaud this display, as if they were parents praising their kids for sharing. The puppets seemed to love it too, as they lapped their bloodied, furry lips. At the time, all of this had seemed unimportant, just another strange and disturbing thing that the house presented that I wouldn't understand no matter how hard I tried. But when I decided I needed to vault down to the roof of the kitchen, I knew I would need something to cushion my 50-foot fall. If I landed on the hard table or the floor, there was no chance of me recovering in time before chaos broke loose. Now I understand how insane jumping smack center into the middle of a murderous dinner sounds, but strangely enough, that wasn't even the most dangerous part of the plan. That was just the middle. The rest was much, much worse. But I didn't stop to think about it. If I thought too long, I knew I would change my mind and come up with something else, and I didn't have time for that. I waited until the playhouse went to bed for the night, then stood up in my chair. Unfortunately, there was no time for sleep either. I made sure the alarm on my watch was still set for when my friends woke up, then crossed to the door. As I placed a hand on the knob, I looked back at the screen. The camera was angled next to Bear. It felt weird leaving it like that, but it gave me the same comfort that lying next to her did. Stay safe, guys. I'm coming for you. I began making my way through the decrepit halls of the place I called home, stepping quietly as I went. The darkness and silence were much more foreboding now that I was alone. It made me glad in the retrospect that Dan had followed me those first few days, although I still would have preferred everyone to be safe over comfort. However, despite the tension, I hated to admit that it felt oddly pleasant to be in that familiar setting once again. I was sick of seeing the sterile rooms of the playhouse. As I went, I made sure that I grabbed any food that I could find. I hadn't left the surveillance room since my arrival, and I had blown through all of the supplies I was carrying in the meantime. But food wasn't what I was looking for. If I was going to pull off rescuing my friends, I would need a few other things. I found the wrench I needed in an old, rusted toolbox. The room I found it in looked like it was still under construction. Out of curiosity, I stepped to one of the unfinished drywall panels and scraped it with the tip of the tool. Sure enough, not a single scratch on it. My mind was drawn back to the catwalk as I continued through the other rooms. How had it fallen? It didn't make any sense. Things in the house didn't just break. In the 4 years of us living in it, that was the one thing we had become absolutely sure of. Maybe the screws were already loose, and us rattling them caused them to fall out. That wasn't considered breaking, was it? It all may have been a small thing that somebody might call a coincidence, but something felt horribly off about the whole thing. I just couldn't place my finger on it. I returned to the safe room a few hours before my friends woke up, giving me some time to rest. I didn't get much. I never did. The day was mostly uneventful, just keeping an eye on Larry to ensure that he didn't try to earn my friends more strikes. I could tell he was always just waiting for the right opportunity, one where the birds wouldn't catch him. I assumed that he had to be in his final strike by now, and that was why he was playing it so safe. When night came, I headed back into the halls, going a different direction this time. We were so deep down that there was a lot to explore, but I was still hoping to find what I needed. If I didn't find it here, I would have to look elsewhere, and once again I had no time for that. I had a close call with the curator at one point, having to dash down a long corridor after hearing tink, tink behind me. Luckily, there was a lockable door at the end of the hall that I managed to reach before
its grotesque hand snatched me up. It beat against the barrier as it usually did, and I turned to find myself in a dead end. I cursed under my breath. I couldn't afford to wait for safety right now, but there was really no other option. I slid my pack off and leaned against the wall, then prayed that Danby and Ethan would be okay while I was away. Stupid creature, I thought. At least it was the only object of my plan that I knew I could find. The damn thing was everywhere. I thought about Larry and how it was a miracle that he hadn't plucked him up the night that he left. I suppose it was some relief that it hadn't. After all, I had been kept up many nights by the guilt of what happened. But knowing now that he had escaped and hadn't been hopelessly taken, I felt less bad. Mainly since he had survived only to try to kill my friends. As if that wasn't why he was down here to begin with. It had been about 2 weeks since Larry's breakdown. We still kept him tied, though he insisted he was better. Nobody believed him. He had a certain look in his eyes that didn't have us convinced. Besides, with the threat he had made to Daniel that night, we really didn't want to risk anything. Larry was now essentially a prisoner within our own prison. We didn't know what else to do with him. At night, we led him into the living room to sleep and took extra precautions on tying him so he couldn't escape. When we made breakfast runs, we brought him into the room and gagged him so he couldn't scream and alert the creature. It all was working okay, but our morale was at an all-time low. We all were the only people we could depend on in the house. The fact that one of us was now considered the enemy made everyone feel small. I stood before the mirror in the bathroom while Jan sat on the toilet with the lid down. Both of us brushed our teeth in silence. After spitting our paste into the sink, I began rinsing my mouth as Jan spoke. "You doing okay, Joel?" I splashed some water on my face, then stepped aside, giving her room to use the cold water the rest of the group had left us. "Yeah, are you?" "Mm-hmm." "You sure? You've got your classic motherly Jan vibe about you." "What's up?" "Nothing. I just noticed that everyone's been really reserved since Larry, well, you know." "Yeah. Small house." Jan laughed. "How's Andy doing? She doesn't ever want to admit how she's feeling." "Yeah, I know. I don't think she likes putting her troubles on everyone else. I just think she's been really shaken up by the whole thing." "Well, I'm glad she's got you through all of this. You two seem really happy together." Jan smiled. "Yeah, I'm glad to have her as well. I can't even imagine this place without her. She's really keeping me going." "You guys better be giving us an invite to the wedding once we get out of here," Jan joked. "Only if you give us one to yours and Mark's." "Hey, what's that supposed to mean?" I chuckled and rolled my eyes. "Come on, Jan. Everybody sees it." She opened the door and flicked the lights off as we exited. "There's nothing to see," Jan smirked. "I just think he's very nice, and I enjoy his company." "Would you keep it down over there? I'm trying to sleep," Larry sarcastically snapped from the living room corner. He lay with his back to the wall. Mine and Jan's juvenile mood quickly dropped. "Good night, Larry." I shot over to him. He lifted a hand tied behind his back and raised his middle finger. Jan and I entered the bedroom, and I took my spot on the floor next to Andy. She immediately pulled close to me, but said nothing. I gently kissed her head and whispered, "Are you okay?" I felt her nod into my chest, but could tell that she was lying.
I already knew what was bothering her. Soon, I told myself. We'll go soon. I lay there for hours staring at the ceiling and listening to Andy's breathing like I did nearly every night. Usually the soothing sound would eventually lull me to sleep, but I had too much on my mind that night. I could never sleep when I knew something was bothering her. It was even worse when I was to blame. I listened below for the creature to see if maybe it was up with me. I heard nothing. I did, however, hear Mark get up from his bed to make his way to the door. It had been less and less common for us to get up and use the bathroom at night. The bodies outside were always unsettling, and with Larry now in the living room, most of us didn't bother. But still, when you had to go, you had to go. I closed my eyes and listened again. I could hear one of the bodies dancing by the bedroom window outside of the house. I wondered if maybe it was Hillary. I was thankful that it didn't make noise or pound on the walls like the thing downstairs did. I listened as Mark flushed the toilet and focused as I heard the contents drain away to some unknown location deep below. How far down did it go? Maybe it was forever. Perhaps it was to nowhere at all. I pondered for a moment before realizing something. Mark hadn't come back yet. I had heard the sink running and then nothing at all. I focused hard to see if I could discern any movement from the bathroom. Maybe he was just taking a moment to himself. Instead, I heard a noise from the hallway, a single soft thud. For a moment, I debated not getting up. Andy was fast asleep with a head on my chest, and the sound of thuds in the night was pretty typical around here. However, something urged me to get up and check due to the circumstances. I slipped out from under Andy, and she gently stirred, rolling over to her pile of sheets. I stepped carefully over Daniel and Ethan, then placed my hand on the doorknob of the door. It was then that I heard the sound of gagging. My heart set to its adrenaline-filled rhythm, and I flung the door open. Mark lay on the hallway floor with Larry on top of him, pressing the rope we had tied him with to his throat in violent determination. "Larry!" I screamed, alerting everyone else, and rushing forward, I grabbed him by the shoulders and yanked hard, trying to rend the man from Mark. He fought back, leaning forward sternly. Instead, I changed my tactic, bent back and thrust forward again, tackling him from the wheezing Mark onto the floor. Larry immediately dropped the rope, and my vision went blurry for a moment as he cracked me across the cheek. Pain began to swell in my jaw, but adrenaline urged me on, and red-hot rage filled me. I began to play his game and slammed my forearm against his throat, then pressed down hard. At that moment, I understood the anger that Daniel had felt each time Larry had crossed him. "What's going on?" Ethan cried, emerging in the doorway. "Holy crap!" he yelled, rushing over to me and helping me pin Larry down. "Help Mark!" I commanded over my shoulder to whoever was listening. A group of people obeyed, and Bear ran to my side to assist Ethan. I just kept my arm against the man's throat and held the pressure as he choked and gagged. Joel, that's enough," Bear muttered beside me. I snapped out of it and eased up, allowing Larry to gasp in some ear. "Get that bastard tied up again," Daniel yelled at us as Ben checked Mark's pulse. I can't tell if his heart is beating, and he's not breathing." Jan instantly broke into sobs as she dropped next to Mark's body and began shaking him. Daniel muttered a few curses under his breath and kneeled down. "Step back," he told Jan and Ben. "I'm gonna do CPR." He began doing chest compressions as she continued to cry. Do you know what you're doing? Is that hurting him? Is he going to be okay?" "Jen, shush," he shot back. He was clearly freaking out. "I've done this before. Bear, Ethan, and I managed to wrestle Larry down and get the ropes retied around his limbs before turning back to the scene behind us. Daniel blew air into Mark's mouth a few times before resuming compressions. After a few more, the unconscious man suddenly snapped awake with a fit of coughing and gasps. Dan sat back with a sigh, and Jan broke into tears of relief and threw her arms around him. "That lunatic tried to kill me," Mark gasped. Larry laughed hysterically like he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Kill you? No, my friend, I was trying to save you." "What a much more peaceful way to go than whatever else could take you." Larry continued to cackle as Daniel stood up and began to walk slowly over to him. Andy caught his arm and tried to stop him, but he yanked it loose. I tried to step in front of him. "Daniel, stop. Get out of my way. This isn't worth..." "Get out of my way." I looked past him to the group, who looked back at me with nervous expressions. It was clear that none of them truly cared what happened at this point, but they didn't want me getting caught up in it. Moments ago, with my hand against his throat, I would have been right there with Dan. But now that the adrenaline was gone and we already had Larry subdued, it seemed inhumane to kick the crap out of him, even though he deserved much, much worse. Reluctantly, I stepped aside. Daniel walked close and towered over Larry. Larry just looked up with a smirk. "You know, Daniel, I only attacked him 'cause I thought he was you. You both kinda look the same in the dark." Daniel knelt low and picked the man up off the ground. We all looked on, waiting in anticipation for whatever he was about to do. To our surprise, Dan just dragged Larry over to the corner of the room, then sat down a few feet away from him. "Everyone back to bed. We need to have a meeting in the morning. I'm going to stay here and watch him for the night." Nobody said anything. We all just looked on in confusion. Are you going to, Grace asked. "No, I'm not going to do anything. Just watch him. We'll talk about it in the morning." Grace nodded and then waited another moment before saying, "All right, everybody. Let's all go." When we were all back into the room, we made sure that Mark was all right before laying back down into our beds. However, I don't know if any of us even slept a wink after that. We were all too anxious. We knew exactly what Daniel was talking about when he said we needed to have a meeting, and none of us wanted to confront the idea. Hello everyone, Grimm here. Thank you very much for making it to the end of another video. This one was Part 9, Episode 1 of Season 2, to the series Somewhere Beneath Us, written by Inkwielder. I'm not going to drag this out, but please be safe wherever you are. Have an amazing night or day, and as always, I'm Grimm, and I'm, signing off.